Good afternoon to all. My name is Brian Lua, um, and my partners are Joey Pineda and Emily Reese. And I will be talking about the 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 presentation that we have to cover for this class, and I'll be explaining the first three slides. So we first start with the rat. A rat is a medium-sized rodent. They are not a mice. Many people confuse them with the mice, but rats are different. They're a little bit bigger. They're also known as rodents, and they're part of the mammalian slash rodentia group. They are very adaptable rodents, which means they have become populous around the world, existing in all areas of the world. Because rats are able to adapt to their environment so easily, they have become one of the most common pests and have been around for millions of years. Ecological habitat. Rats live in many places. There are rats who live in the wilderness, like the woods, the forests, as well as like the fields. There are also wild tree rats that live in tropical islands. They are invasive species that have taken over the entire populations of wildlife. Rats have also adapted very well to populated and urban areas. They have come indoors by using openings. I'm pretty sure everyone has encountered a situation where a rat has gone in someone's house, or at least heard of it. They could get into anywhere, like apartment buildings, restaurants, hospitals, and homes. Some rats, or most of the rats, live in sewers and underground. They could crawl their way into homes and buildings from the sewers. And then the food chain ecosystem. Since they live near humans, their presence directly affects each other. So since they live next to us, they have lots of food, they're always by the food waste. They could cause food shortages and damage crops. They can damage crops, and they could also populate food supplies. They are abundant, and lots of predators like foxes, owls, take advantage of these rats. And around 88% mortality rate between these rats.
In highly favorable conditions for a rat, they can mate year-round, with their gestation period lasting up to 21 days, and their litters can be anywhere from 7 to 15, but 7 is usually more common. After being born, it takes around 5 weeks to reach sexual maturity. Given 2 suitable rats in any given year, with optimal conditions, their population can reach a soaring high of around 20,000. As per mating behaviors, the males can ejaculate multiple times in a row, which is feasible in its own right, but it reduces the chances of stillborns while simultaneously increasing the chances of pregnancy. Males copulate at far less intervals than females, and females also tend to favor other partners rather than the same in a row, and usually go for more dominant rats. As per the anatomy of a rat, It encompasses the head or cranial region, neck or cervical region, chest or thoracic portion, pectoral, abdomen, and the tail. And you can differentiate between male and female, as the male rat possesses a pair of large scrotal sacs. In the neck region, the salivary glands can be found to the side of the neck. Anterior to these glands are the lymph nodes. Thyroid glands are present on each side of the trachea, and in the chest area is the diaphragm. Underneath that is the heart. In the thoracic portion are the lungs, and below is the abdomen. Major organs here are the liver, which is dark in color, the stomach below that, the spleen attached to the side of the stomach, small intestine and large intestines, and the excretory system are the kidneys and testes.
Next, we have the worm, and the kingdom that the worm belongs to is the Animalia. The phylum that the worm belongs to is the Annelida. The class that the worm belongs to is the Oligoceta. The order is the Opistopora. The family that the worm belongs to is the invertebrate phyla. The genus is the Lumbricus linnaeus. And finally, the species that the worm belongs to is the Lumbricus terrestris. Next, we also have the worm's ecological habitat. And most worms are very, very common all over the world. They're not nowhere. They're usually everywhere, especially in the ground. Worms can live anywhere, such as the sea, freshwater, and any moist soil. And when it comes to the soil, worms must be in soil that contain the nutrients that they need in order to survive. Because if it doesn't have the nutrients, then the worm would just not produce what it's supposed to produce. And next, we have the food chain and the ecosystem. Worms are really important for humans, especially for the soil that they end up producing. And they digest the soil and anything and everything that's in it. And they create really good soil for our plants, kind of like a fertilizer. While they are eating the soil, they consume their own body weight, and they also aerate the soil, which supplies the plants' growth way better, and it helps their roots expand, which makes the plant healthier in general because their roots are so expanded, they have more space. In the ecosystem, worms are not the lowest of the lowest, but they are definitely food for many animals. We use them as bait, for example, to lure in fish when fishing. Not only that, but they're also a great source of food for other animals such as birds, moles, snakes, etc. Next, we have the worm's mating behaviors. And since worms are hermaphrodites, this means that worms have both the male and the female reproductive system. But even though they do have both of the reproductive systems, they cannot self-fertilize. They must mate with another worm. And they tend to mate at 4 weeks old, which is when they are sexually mature enough. They go up towards the surface to perform their mating process. And what happens during the mating process is the worms lay next to each other, facing different directions. And they release a mucus. And while they are still firmly pressed together, the sperm is then released and the mating process is over and the worms separate from each other. Next, we have the worm's anatomy. A worm's body is made up of many segments that are called annuli. So that means that if we chop them up, the worm could still possibly live since it's made of so many parts. A worm's body length also consists of muscles that contract and then relax, which allows them to move around. And instead of having lungs, worms have these really tiny holes in their skin, which absorbs the air, and that air that they absorb goes to their bloodstream. Worms also do not have eyes, noses, or ears. And their bodies must remain moist at all times. And they also have 5 hearts.
Comparative anatomy. Both rats and worms share these in common as per their digestive system. They both have a mouth and salivary glands. Rats have 5 pairs and worms have 1. They both have an esophagus and sphincter muscles. Earthworms, however, do not have a stomach. Instead, they have a gizzard which aids in digestion, and one singular intestine that spans the entirety of the body from the gizzard down to the anus. They also don't have a liver, but they do have Chlorgen tissue which acts like their liver. Gallbladder and pancreas are not present in the worm either. For their excretory and reproductive system, rats contain a urinary bladder. They have testes, and in female rats, they have a uterus and ovaries. Worms, unlike rats, don't have kidneys, but they do have nymphaea, which function all the same. It acts as their own sort of kidney, and they're present in all segments of the worm except the first 3 and the last segment of the body. They remove waste from the blood. Rats contain renal arteries, renal veins, and ureters. For the respiratory system, rats breathe through their lungs and have a nasal cavity. Both rats and worms have a pharynx, larynx, trachea, epiglottis, bronchia, alveoli, and a diaphragm. Worms don't have any of those, save for the pharynx and larynx, and they diffuse oxygen across their skin. For the circulatory system, rats have a pulmonary system, while worms have a closed system. And unlike rats, worms don't have a true heart. Instead, they have 5 pseudo-hearts that wrap around its esophagus, and these pseudo-hearts don't pump blood, but rather squeeze vessels to help circulate blood throughout the worm's body, hence their closed circulatory system. And worms have 3 main vessels in them, which aid in this circulatory system: the aortic arches, ventral blood vessels, and dorsal blood vessels. Both these organisms have blood and plasma, but worms don't contain platelets in their blood. As for the taxonomic tree, the family which rats belong to, the Muridae, first appeared during the late Eocene period around 34 million years ago. Worms, however, appeared in the fossil record around 66 million years ago, so divergence most likely occurred during the 40 million year mark. Of course, there's no accurate taxonomic tree that contains all life forms that ever evolved on the Earth, so this is just a rough estimate. But during that 66 million mark, life was undergoing another mass extinction event called the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, which eliminated around a third of all life. So smaller organisms like the worm were able to survive because they didn't need a lot of sustenance. They just kept on thriving as they always had. And around 34 million years ago was the late Cenozoic Ice Age. So larger life forms could also not sustain themselves on the scarcity of food around this time, so smaller organisms like the rat were able to survive and thrive.
This is our works cited. Thank you for listening.